Just going to talk a little bit about color spaces and color profiles, and also some Photoshop settings that you're going to want to be using if you're going to make the most of these profiles. Now, first of all, you need to install any profiles that you have. So we're talking about printer profiles here, so any labs that you use, WHCC, whatever, you should have obtained their printer profiles for the printing that you're doing, or your own profiles if you do your own printing. So first of all, we need to get those profiles wherever you've got them stored, copy them, and we need to paste them into a particular folder. Now, macOS for some reason likes to hide the library. There is a setting to have it always available. However, your best bet is to simply go to your Go tab and then press your Option button, and library will appear when you press that button. So we go into our library and we go into a folder called Color Sync and then Profiles, and we paste them in there, which obviously I've already done. Now we need to go into Photoshop at that point. There's a few things we need to do here, but the first is going to be your color settings. The default settings for this is pretty poor. Now, working spaces, I've chosen ProPhoto RGB here. That's just a go-to color space for me. I will often change it down to Adobe RGB. It just depends what I'm working on, but we'll get into that a little bit later. These CMYK grey spot, they can all stay the same. Now down here, it becomes important. Color management policies, you want to preserve your embedded profiles for each of these, but the RGB is the one that we're mostly interested in. You also want your warning boxes checked. So profile mismatches, ask when opening or ask when pasting. So if you're opening an image that's got a different working color space to what you're usually working in, you want it to ask you what you want to do. If there's no profile present with the image, you want it to ask you. Otherwise, it's just going to default and convert profiles behind the scenes, and you may not get the result that you want. Down here, you want to use black point compensation, and you keep these ones checked, keep these ones down here unchecked. So you don't want, with your advanced controls, you don't want it to desaturate your monitor colors, you don't want it to blend RGB colors, because you are already using color management. You have a profiled monitor, okay, a calibrated monitor. You don't want Photoshop to go and muck that up on you. So once you've chosen that, click OK. I forgot to mention your conversion options, your intent. Now, most people will tell you to use perceptual. The issue with perceptual is you don't necessarily get an accurate conversion. You get Photoshop's estimate at what that should be. Now, if you're using profiles with lookup tables built in, Adobe RGB has that, for example. sRGB, the standard ISO web format one, does not. And you may need to use perceptual if you don't have an sRGB with an LUT built into it. So these lookup tables, what they do is they give an actual matrix of what the colors should be converted to. So assuming that you do have these profiles and that you're going to be converting using profiles with an LUT built in, which will give you a much better color representation, we want to use relative colorimetry. A word on color spaces. Now, you'll also hear the opinion from quite a number of people that you should use the largest color space available to you at all times. ProPhoto is typically the one that people mention, simply because it is so vast. It certainly encompasses anything that you could ever print. Now, the issue we have is any colour is going to be finite, right? From black through to white, right? With every shade in between. So that's the reason I've just got an 8-bit grayscale chart up here, just so that you can visualise it a little bit. Now, if your colour profile is too small, obviously your image is going to get clipped. So, as an example, okay, we've drawn a box. Let's pretend that our image is the chart and our profile is the box. Clearly we're going to get clipping because some of the colours fall outside of our profile. Now, if we go the other way, if our profile is too big, we may end up with posterization, and that's essentially as a result of stretching of the image to fit the colour space. So we still only have 256 blocks from black through to white, or in any colour that you care to pick on the colour wheel. So if we go for a colour space that's far too large, we're just wasting a lot of space and we're stretching those blocks out. That's what gives us our posterization. So ideally, you want to use the smallest colour space that encompasses all of the input and the output colours of your image. And by input colours, I mean the colours that are already in the image when you take it, and by output colours, we're talking about what you are capable of printing. So some of your larger printer profiles, WHCC's profiles for example, will mostly fall within Adobe RGB. Only a couple of colours here and there may be slightly clipped as a result. So Adobe RGB is probably going to be preferable for most printing purposes. It's only if you're photographing something with very bright artificial colours, bright cars, plastics, that sort of thing, where there may be a couple that might clip noticeably, in which case you'll need to go to a larger profile, such as ProPhoto. If you're just shooting people, right, studio portraits generally with earthy sort of colours for clothing, or just headshots where there are no bright colours at all just colours that you'd find in the natural world, then you're not going to get any clipping even with sRGB. So sRGB can sometimes be the best colour space to work in, within which to work. We have here an image on the screen that is essentially skin tones, and it's every skin tone that you can imagine is presented in this small box. Now the shape that you see, the grey, if you're not used to looking at gamuts, that's the sRGB colour space. So a gamut is three-dimensional representation. Here it's represented in 2 dimensions, so that's why there are 3 images of it. As you can see, skin tones fall well within sRGB on every scale, on every axis. So if you're taking photographs with neutral backgrounds, neutral clothing, it doesn't matter what skin tone the person has, it's going to fall within sRGB. So standard studio shots, sRGB, perfect for this. There are no artificial colours, there are no bright colours. Here, clearly I've already worked on this image, but once again, every colour in there falls within sRGB. There's no need to go to Adobe at this point. Again, straight out of the camera, nothing in there that sRGB can't handle. Here, now we're starting to get towards Adobe RGB requirements. Okay, we've got a little bit of brighter pink in there that may not be quite covered by sRGB. So we've got some contrast here, might be starting to get towards Adobe. This one was edited in Adobe simply for the bright colours in the dresses. Again, Adobe. So we've got some fairly bright colours in this image, and we still don't need to go anywhere near Pro Photo. So if we go back to this image here, we'll open it up in Photoshop. Now, I've already set this to Pro Photo, so this is open in Pro Photo. If we run a conversion where we convert to a profile, what I've got here, I've got the Kodak sRGB ICC. Now that's available from the Kodak website. It's a free download. So if you just Google Kodak sRGB ICC, you should find a number of sites from where you can download it. Now, this profile has the lookup table. Very important for conversion because we're going to use relative colorimetric. Okay, as soon as we start using perceptual, we're going to run into issues. But if you don't have an LUT profile, like I said before, go with perceptual. It's going to be your best bet because at least Photoshop can then make a bit of a guess as to what it should be. We do want to use black point compensation. Just leave that on as standard. We open up our advanced here, we can see all our options. However, because we're working on a monitor, we're just using RGB. There's nothing else that we need. You can turn your preview on and off, and as we see going from Pro Photo straight down to sRGB, there's no change in the colour. What we can do after we've converted to our Kodak ICC profile, which has the LUT, the LUT makes your file larger. So if you're going to be displaying your photo on the web, you don't want to leave it as the Kodak sRGB profile. Now, the Kodak sRGB and the standard ISO sRGB that you use on the web are the same other than the LUT. So it's very, very simple at that point to simply assign profile and choose your standard sRGB, and that will just get rid of the LUT, making your file smaller. Image. Here's I guess that's fairly bright in the scheme of things. Maybe not so much the yellow. That yellow probably actually does still fit within sRGB, which might be a little bit surprising, but this blue here actually falls outside of sRGB. So over here we've got another representation of the colour. So we've got, what we've got here are two printer profiles. So we've got a light jet profile and Epson R800 profile. sRGB colour space here, and as we can see, some of that blue is falling outside of sRGB. So at this point, we definitely do want to step up to Adobe RGB. It would be unlikely that any of that would fall outside of Adobe. But if you're not sure, look, always err on the side of going to a larger colour space. So if you think you've got something that's a bit too bright for your colour space, or you're just not sure, go to the next one up. You're certainly better off going up and having to deal with a bit of posterization rather than going too small and ending up with clipping. Particularly if it's a relevant part of the image. If it's just something in the background that's not terribly important, well, go for what is going to work best for you and for your image and for your output. Just a quick note now, just to finish things off, just on soft proofing your images. So here's an image that I've worked up to print, and I have already printed this on an Epson 7900. Now, what we need to do is we need to go to View at the top, Proof Setup, choose Custom, and in here, this is where we choose our profile that we've installed, so our printer profile. So in this case, this is an Epson 7900 profile. The way this profile was created for me by Les Walkling, and he codes his profiles in such a way, you know, for the printer and for the paper and for the process. So there's a black and white profile here. This is a color profile for Ilford Smooth Pearl, which is a fantastic paper with a nice sort of satin luster. Not an art paper. Okay. Now we want our black point compensation on again. Our rendering intent, of course, we want it as relative colorimetric. We don't want to change any of that from our previous settings. Now down here, simulate paper color. If I turn that on and off, you'll see a slight change. And this is where some of you may be having some trouble with your photos becoming a bit muddy, is that you're not taking into account the paper. If you don't have the printer profile from whoever's doing your printing or for your own printer, if you don't have it installed there, you're not going to be able to check that against the paper as well. So you can see we do lose a little bit of contrast. And you can make up for that in your processing. You can make your image a little bit punchier to help account for that loss. So we've got our preview on and off. And so you can just do a bit of a check to see how it's going to come out. So, okay, we've had a look at that. We also want to have our gamut warning on. And you can see here, all this grey that's shown up, that means that that part of the image is outside of what I can print using that profile on my printer. It's probably outside of what the printer can print. It's a very good profile. It encompasses just about every colour that the printer can print. Your factory profiles will not be as good. They will not make the most of your printer. Now anyway, getting back to the image, this little bit of out of gamut colour is not in a critical part of the image. Okay, so yes, there will be some clipping, some slight blocking, but it's in darker parts of the image. It's scattered, and it's not on our subjects. So and I can verify because I've printed without going back and modifying this image to account for that clipping, and you can't see it in the final print. But if it was something critical, or it was a big blob of out of gamut, then I'd have issues, and I'd end up with a blocky looking print or loss of detail. It's going to look terrible. So that's your final stage. Once you've done your proofing and you're happy with your image, you're good to go. So look, I hope that helps. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to try to do another video to explain any steps that don't make sense, or just to clarify any points. I'm probably not the best at explaining colour management, but I do have a reasonable working knowledge of it, thanks to spending a couple of weeks with Les Walkling, who's just incredible at this stuff. I would say he's forgotten more than I've managed to learn, even in 2 weeks. Anyway, thanks for watching.